Forget about the romance of adventure, the glory of explorers, and the grandeur of discoveries. There is no heroism here, no scientific progress, no enlightened patrons. There is only damp, hunger, filth, suspicion, endless exhaustion, and the struggle to survive among people who only need maps when they can use them against a neighbor or to start a new quarrel. But before you get comfortable, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments which city you're watching from and what time it is there. I'm really curious to see who has joined us. Now get comfortable. We're about to begin. You wake to the sound of rats bickering under your bed. Not that you can actually call it a bed. The so called mattress is nothing more than a pile of straw, gray with age and damp with the endless moisture that creeps through every board and crack of your wooden room. Your bones ache from the cold that has seeped into them during the night. Your blanket, if a fraying, lice infested piece of burlap can bear that title, smells strongly of mildew and something worse, something like disappointment mixed with decades of old sweat. You lie still for a moment, blinking in the blue gray twilight that leaks through the single shuttered window. The day begins not with hope, but with inventory. You check your arms for bites. There are always fresh ones. The fleas are persistent, the bed bugs tireless, and the lice seem to breed even in the absence of obvious nourishment. You pick one from your forearm and crush it between your fingernails. A dull satisfaction, nothing more. The first order of business is to drive away the rats. Not because you particularly mind their company, though you do, but because they have a disturbing tendency to gnaw through anything even remotely edible. You keep your bread and your hard cheese tied up and hung from a ceiling beam, but the creatures are resourceful. This morning, there is a torn scrap of sackcloth and some suspicious crumbs. You sigh. The battle is endless, and always you are losing ground. The room itself is both your home and your workshop. Its single warped table is covered with your most precious possessions: a cracked ink pot, a few stubs of quills, one battered compass, and, of course, your precious, irreplaceable sheets of paper. Every corner of the room is colonized by the debris of your craft: half finished maps, old shoes, wax stubs, pieces of charcoal, scraps of last year's wool, a broken mug whose only use now is as a paperweight. Your boots, if they can still be called boots, sit in the cold mud by the door, caked in filth from last week's failed attempt to cross the stream by the mill. There is a hole in the right one large enough to let in every drop of water and every grain of grit that the road can offer. You have no money for new boots. You barely have money for bread. You sit up. There is a moment of dizziness as you swing your legs off the bed and into the chilly air. You sniff. Your nose is blocked. The room's reek is familiar, almost comforting now, a mix of sweat, tallow smoke, and the ever-present damp. The walls are stained a deep, iridescent green by mold. If you look closely, you can see tiny mushrooms beginning to sprout near the floorboards. You do not look closely. There are some mysteries that even a cartographer is better off ignoring. You hear voices from outside. The village is awake, and with it, the machinery of survival begins its ancient grind. A woman shouts for her child. Someone curses as a chicken escapes, and the muffled clang of a hammer rings from the blacksmith's shed. The world is going about its business, muddy and indifferent. You reach for the lump of bread you hid under your blanket last night. It is stale, impossibly hard, and crusted with a fine layer of dust. You knock it against the wall to shake off the worst of it, then gnaw at the edge. It tastes of nothing. You chew slowly, as if more time will somehow coax out a flavor. It does not. You consider the wedge of cheese on the shelf, but you are saving that for later, perhaps for lunch, perhaps for tomorrow. There is never enough, and so you ration yourself with the precision of a miser and the fatalism of a condemned man. Today, like every day, will be spent in the same dull rhythm, drawing, measuring, writing, hoping that your maps are close enough to reality that no one will come knocking with torches or questions. No one wants to be thought a liar, least of all you. But everyone knows that a map is, by its nature, a lie, one told with ink and optimism, and not a little guesswork. You move to the window and unlatch the shutter. The morning air is cold, sharp, and heavy with the scent of manure. Mist clings to the earth. In the distance, you can see the forest, black and unwelcoming. Somewhere beyond is the road, and beyond that, other villages, other lords, other dangers. For now, you must content yourself with survival. A day where you are not beaten, robbed, accused, or simply starved is a day worth marking on a calendar, if you had such a thing. You do not, of course. Instead, you measure the passage of time by the gradual disappearance of your supplies and the increasing fragility of your health. You hear a scratching at the door, a rat, or something larger. You grab your walking stick and push it open, ready to defend your meager hoard. The outside world, gray and miserable, waits. You step into it, already tired, already hoping for dusk. And so begins another day in the life of a medieval cartographer, cold, hungry, dirty, and above all, utterly ordinary. You think about water every morning, almost as much as you think about food, shelter, and the various unpleasant ways in which you might die. Water is life, they say, but in your case, water is also filth, risk, and a daily humiliation. You stare at the battered wooden bucket in the corner, empty, with a splinter that will one day find its way into your palm. It is your responsibility, as always, to fill it. Nobody is coming to help you. No one in this village gives a single thought to the cartographer and his bucket. You trudge out the door, shoes squelching, already bracing for the walk through mud. The lane between the houses is narrow, winding, and choked with refuse. It is too early for most villagers to be about, but not so early that you escape their notice entirely. Someone glares from behind a cracked shutter. The baker's boy, always a bit too curious, follows you with his eyes, as if you are about to conjure the devil from your bucket instead of just fetch a bit of water. The village well is at the center of everything. If by center one means the lowest, muddiest, and most trampled place available, the well itself is ancient, stones slimy and shifting underfoot. There is already a queue, a sharp elbowed old woman, a child with a jug half her size, a broad shouldered man whose boots are newer and cleaner than yours. Nobody talks. Everyone glares. You wait your turn, pretending not to notice the way they inch away from you. You are, after all, not one of them. You are a stranger, a scribbler, a watcher, someone who writes things down. And then everyone knows that people who write things down are not to be trusted. Your turn arrives. You lower the bucket, listening to it knock against the slimy stones, splashing somewhere deep below. When you haul it up, the water is cloudy, swirling with things best left unidentified. You sniff it, grimace, and think about what you will do with this liquid. Drink, wash, maybe clean your single shirt. If you are lucky, you will avoid dysentery for one more day. But the well is not the only source. Sometimes, if it has rained, you gather water from puddles near the edge of the woods. This is a calculated risk. Every drop you take is a drop that could be poisoned by the offal that runs downhill, by the rot and the dung that the villagers toss from their windows, with all the care of a sullen child flinging stones into a pond. If you boil the water, it tastes like smoke. If you do not, it tastes like death, or at least the threat of it. Once, a kindly old man, one of the few who ever offered you anything except suspicion, told you about a spring in the forest where the water runs clear as crystal. You went looking for it, of course. You followed his vague directions for half a day through brambles and bogs, and found only a stagnant pool buzzing with mosquitoes. You returned with your bucket empty, your legs torn by thorns, and a deeper understanding of the way hope can be as poisonous as water. Washing is its own trial. You stand outside your hut, bucket in hand, wondering whether today is the day you dare to remove your shirt and sponge yourself down with a damp rag. In summer, it is easier. You can pretend the chill is bracing, that you are somehow refreshed by the ordeal. In winter, the very thought of stripping is enough to make your teeth chatter. More often than not, you content yourself with washing your face and hands, scrubbing at the ground in dirt with a piece of rough cloth that smells as bad as the rest of you. Soap is a luxury reserved for the Lord's household and the occasional feast. You have seen it only twice, both times in the hands of women who looked at you as if you were something the cat dragged in. There are always observers. Children stare. Old men mutter about strange habits. The village priest crosses himself when he sees you dousing your head, as if cleanliness were the sign of a heretic. You wonder sometimes if you would attract less attention by simply wallowing in the mud with the pigs. Perhaps you would. Pigs are, after all, considered useful. Your clothes, never new, now hang from your frame in damp strips, patched and repatched until the original cloth is lost beneath a patchwork of other people's rags. You wring them out as best you can, watching the water drip brown into the mud, and wish, not for the first time, that you could walk naked through a stream somewhere far from prying eyes and sharper tongues. When the washing is done, such as it is, you turn to the business of drinking. You pour the water into a cracked cup, eyeing the floating flecks with the resignation of a man who knows exactly what he is risking. You drink anyway. Thirst is more dangerous than anything living in that well. The taste is earthy, metallic, faintly reminiscent of the muck you scrape from your boots, but it is wet and it fills your belly. You think of all the places you have read about in travelers' stories, where water flows clear and sweet, where people bathe in springs without fear of disease or judgment. You wonder if such places exist, or if they are merely the inventions of men who have never had to fight a rat for a share of tepid well water. You suspect the latter. You return to your room, your bucket lighter, your skankin' marginally cleaner, and your mind no less troubled than when you began. The rest of the day looms ahead, endless, grim, marked by the twin tyrannies of necessity and habit. There is, at least, the comfort of routine. There is the knowledge that if nothing else, you have survived another morning's ordeal. That in itself is an accomplishment. You sit at your table, your hair still damp, and stare at your ink stained hands. Tomorrow, you will do it all again and again after that, for as long as you can remember why it matters to try. Breakfast is not a meal, it is a negotiation. You survey your supplies, a half loaf of bread, hard as the stone on which it was once baked, and a knobby onion with a few shriveled roots still attached. Somewhere, wedged between a heap of parchments and a moldy scrap of cheesecloth, you find a crumb of yesterday's cheese. This is your bounty. It is neither inspiring nor particularly nourishing, but it is all you have. You contemplate the bread first. It was fresh 4 days ago, fragrant from the communal oven, but now it has the texture of old leather and the taste of dust. You bang it on the table to break off a piece, sending up a puff of stale flour and startling the lone cockroach picking its way through your papers. The crust is as resistant as your hope, the inside gummy and damp, where moisture from the room has begun to reclaim it. You gnaw slowly, chewing with determination rather than pleasure. Each mouthful grinds your teeth a little flatter, but at least it fills your belly. The cheese is next. It is sour, waxy, bearing the unmistakable tang of age and neglect. You scrape the worst of the mold from the edge, careful to save even the tiniest flake that is not entirely blue. Mold, you tell yourself, is just another flavor, one you do not relish, but one you have grown accustomed to. You once read about cheeses so fine that they are served only to kings and bishops, cheeses that melt on the tongue and taste of springtime. Yours, by contrast, tastes of cellar walls and resignation. You set the onion aside for later. It will be your lunch, a harsh, tear inducing luxury that must be eked out slowly. For now, you settle for another mouthful of bread, a little cheese, and a swallow of water from your bucket. Water that has now been flavored with the bread's crumbs, the sharp tang of old wood, and the faint memory of last week's soapless washing. You think, not for the first time, that there is something almost heroic in your ability to endure this daily assault on your taste buds. Outside, the village is coming to life. You can hear the hammer of the blacksmith, the clatter of chickens in the muddy lane, the muffled shouts of men heading out to the fields. Breakfast for them is the same, a bowl of cold gruel, perhaps, or a heel of bread. On good days, someone might share an egg or a sliver of bacon if a pig has been slaughtered for the Lord's table, but those are rare days, and you have learned not to expect such charity. You remember dimly the last time you tasted meat. It was months ago, perhaps longer, a stringy bit of rabbit shared around a smoky fire on the road, the bones picked clean by desperate, greedy hands. Even then, it was not so much a meal as a brief and unsatisfying distraction from hunger. Here in this village, meat is for feast days and funerals, not for men like you. The villagers eye you with suspicion, certain you are too thin to be trusted, too hungry to be anything but trouble. You spread your meager breakfast across the table, trying to make it last, trying to pretend that there is more than there is. Each bite is a careful calculation, a small act of self denial. You eat slowly, chewing until the blandness becomes almost interesting, until the texture is the only thing left to contemplate. It is not enough, of course. It never is. You wonder sometimes how other cartographers fare. In the great cities, if the stories are to be believed, scholars dine on honey cakes and figs, on roast game and fresh fruit. Their maps are illuminated with gold leaf, their hands unscarred by cold or work. You suspect the truth is less glamorous. Even in the city, hunger is an old companion, one that does not discriminate between scholar and peasant. Only the truly rich, the lords and merchants, escape its grip. As you eat, you glance at your maps, the labor of weeks, months, sometimes years. They are stained with oil and sweat, marked with the smudges of dirty fingers and the tiny holes where insects have made a meal of the parchment. You remember the places you have seen: muddy roads, dark forests, ruined bridges. There is no abundance in those places, only the same gnawing scarcity, the same struggle for a scrap of comfort. You finish your breakfast with a sigh. There is no satisfaction, only relief that the ritual is complete. You push the crumbs into a corner, saving them for later, perhaps for a bird, or more likely, for the next rat bold enough to invade your room. You think about the day ahead, about the work to be done, about the constant, grinding need to survive. Hunger is not just a sensation, it is a condition, a state of mind that seeps into every task, every thought, every mark you make on the page. You stand, stretching your aching limbs, and listen to the rumble of your own stomach. There will be no second breakfast, No mid morning treat. Lunch, if it comes, will be the onion, raw and biting, chased with another cup of brackish water. Dinner is too distant to contemplate. For now, you must be content with the memory of bread, the ghost of cheese, and the certainty that tomorrow will bring more of the same. The day stretches before you, empty and unpromising. There are maps to draw, errands to run, dangers to avoid. You gather your things, wrap the onion in a scrap of cloth, and slip it into your pocket. Outside, the sun is already high, promising heat and flies, and the dull ache of another day survived. You close the door behind you, taking one last look at the table, at the crumbs and the cup and the broken cheese. Breakfast is over. The struggle continues. You step into the street, your belly neither full nor empty, your heart resigned. The village ignores you, the world moves on, and you take your place among the hungry, the dirty, the forgotten. It is just another morning for a medieval cartographer, another breakfast not worth waiting for. Your livelihood depends on a handful of objects, each one precious, unreliable, and forever teetering on the edge of ruin. To call your possessions tools of the trade is to flatter them and yourself. They are more accurately relics, cast offs, things salvaged from the belongings of the dead or bartered from travelers who did not understand their value. In this world, even a splintered ruler is a treasure. Your quills are the most basic requirement, though quill suggests a level of quality rarely attained. You have scavenged every feather you could find: goose, crow, even the occasional chicken. The best are the long, sturdy flight feathers, but those are quickly worn down by the relentless scraping against rough, unyielding parchment. Each time you sharpen one, you lose a little more. Each time, you wonder how many marks are left before you are scratching with nothing but a stub. A proper metal-nibbed pen would be a thing of myth, a reward for a lifetime of honest service, or a gift from a patron you will never have. Your ink is a concoction of desperation and luck. On good days, it comes from the peddler in the next town over, a thick, sticky brew that smells sharply of iron and gall. On bad days, you make it yourself, mixing soot and wine, scraping rust from discarded nails, and boiling it with whatever you can find that will stain a fingertip. The results vary. Sometimes the ink runs thin and gray, fading to invisibility as it dries. Sometimes it sits on the surface in oily puddles, refusing to soak in, ready to be smeared by the next careless touch of your sleeve. The compass is the finest tool you own and the one that causes you the greatest anxiety. It is small, dented, the needle only loosely attached, but it works after a fashion. On humid days, the needle sticks. On cold mornings, the glass fogs. Once, when you tried to show it to a village elder, the man grew pale and crossed himself, muttering about unnatural magic. You put it away quickly. A lost compass would be the end of your career. A discovered compass could easily be the end of your life. You treat it with the reverence that others reserve for relics and icons. You sleep with it under your pillow, one hand clutching it, half expecting to wake up to find it stolen or shattered. Then there is your ruler, whittled from the leg of a broken stool. The marks are uneven, worn by years of measuring, gouged and burned in places by hasty attempts to straighten lines in the half light of a guttering candle. It is not straight. You know this. Everyone knows this. You compensate as best you can, adding a little here, subtracting a little there, hoping the inaccuracies even out over distance. They never do, of course. Your maps are at best approximate. At worst, they are dangerous, guides to nowhere, invitations to get lost. Paper is your greatest luxury and your worst headache. You hoard every scrap, flattening wrinkled pieces beneath your mattress, carefully scraping old notes from the surface when space grows tight. Sometimes you must use both sides, layering new drawings atop old, the ghosts of forgotten paths showing through. Perpetual shortage is your constant companion. Each fresh sheet is a miracle, the result of weeks of barter, promises, and humiliations. Once you traded a night's shelter for a single ragged piece of vellum. The owner insisted you sleep outside to keep the fleas out. You agreed. The map you drew on that scrap was ruined by rain the next day. Candles and tallow stubs are your source of light. On long nights, you work by the flickering glow of a wax stub, shading your eyes from the acrid smoke. The shadows dance across your maps, obscuring lines and tricking your tired mind into seeing forests where there are only hills. Tallow is cheaper, but the smell is appalling, like burnt hair and spoiled fat. You ration your light, working only as long as you must, refusing to waste even a minute's illumination on something as frivolous as comfort. You keep a battered knife at hand for sharpening quills and scraping mistakes from the parchment. The blade is dull, often skipping across the surface, tearing holes instead of removing ink. The hilt is wrapped in old linen, and the edges chipped from years of abuse. You are as likely to cut your thumb as to repair your work, but it is all you have. Each item is a problem waiting to happen. If the ink freezes, you must warm it over the candle, risking fire. If the ruler snaps, you must find another piece of wood that can pass for straight. If you drop your compass, you pray that it does not shatter, because no one will sell you another, not at any price you can pay. If you run out of paper, you are reduced to memory, to marking the dirt with a stick or scratching plans into the palm of your hand. There are moments when you resent your tools, these miserable bits of refuse on which your entire life depends. You see the blacksmith's sturdy hammer, the baker's peel, the farmer's heavy plow, and you envy their certainty, their reliability. Your tools are slippery, fragile, traitorous things, and in every day is a battle not just against ignorance and suspicion, but against the constant, grinding threat of collapse. And yet, for all their failings, you cannot do without them. Each quill, each ink stained scrap, Each wobbling circle drawn with a broken compass is proof that you still exist, that your work has meaning, even if that meaning is only to you. In a world that values muscle over mind and suspicion over skill, these tools are your only defense, your only claim to respect. You keep them close, counting them each night before you sleep, and each morning when you wake. You polish the compass, check the ink, sharpen the quills, lay the paper flat. It is a ritual, an act of hope against a world that offers none. You know that one day something will break and you will be unable to replace it. When that happens, your maps will end, your work will cease, and you will become just another nameless figure, remembered only for what you failed to create. But not today. Today, you still have your tools. Today, you are still a cartographer, if only by the thinnest, most fragile thread. Night falls quickly, and with it, your world shrinks to the feeble glow cast by a single candle stub or a guttering lump of tallow. For a few precious minutes, the window's last gray light holds out against the encroaching dark, but soon even that is gone, replaced by the uncertain dance of yellow flame. This is your working time. It has to be. The day is for errands, for trudging through mud, for dodging suspicion and scraping together supplies. The night is when you can finally be alone with your maps, though you are never truly alone. There are always rats. You set up at your rickety table, careful to prop the leg with a folded rag so it will not tip. Your tools, what few remain unbroken, are arranged in their usual positions. Ink, thick and smoky, quills, chipped but still functional, knife for scraping, ruler for pretending things are straight. The candle sits in the center, its flame shivering with every draft. Even a closed door and stuffed window do not keep out the wind entirely. Cold seeps in and hugs your ankles like a resentful cat. The light is barely enough for detail work. It flickers, causing shadows to crawl over your maps. Sometimes you think you see the forests on the parchment actually move, stretching out black fingers, rivers shimmering with ghostly waves. This is not poetic fancy, but exhaustion, hunger, and a mind that longs for rest. You squint, leaning closer. There is no room for mistakes, but mistakes are inevitable. Your sleeve smears a newly inked hill. A drop of wax falls, blotting out a village you had painstakingly marked that afternoon. Your hand cramps, the bones in your wrist grinding as you force your letters smaller and smaller to conserve space. Every inch of parchment is precious. Working by candlelight is a performance, one where failure is the only certainty. Wax spatters, ink runs. The tallow sputters and spits, threatening to go out with every shudder of wind. There is never enough light, and what you have is both a blessing and a torment. The heat from the flame is too little to warm your fingers, but just enough to make your forehead sweat and your eyes sting. You wipe at your brow, leaving a smear of ink across your temple, but you cannot see it, and so you do not care. If the candle gutters, the world is plunged into absolute darkness. You have tried to work by moonlight. It is impossible. The cold blue wash picks out nothing but your own fatigue. Sometimes, in desperation, you try to memorize a line or a curve before the flame fails completely, hoping you can reproduce it in the morning. It never works. In the dark, the only thing that grows clearer is your awareness of how tired you are, how hungry, how alone. The work itself is a form of madness. You draw what you remember, what you have seen, and what others have told you, always a compromise between observation, rumor, and outright guesswork. The forest here, a road there, a river that no one has actually followed from source to mouth. When you pause, you hear the faint scrabble of rodents under the floorboards, the slow drip of water from the corner where the roof leaks. You are mapping not only the world, but your own confinement. Your hands shake from cold, from hunger, from the accumulated strain of endless days and nights spent hunched over your work. You breathe on your fingers, willing them to limber up, but it is no use. The candle burns lower. The wax puddles on the tabletop, flowing around your ruler, sticking your maps together. You lift one too quickly and hear the parchment tear. You swear quietly under your breath. The rats are listening. On rare nights, you have more than one candle. Perhaps you traded an old shirt or went without food. These are your festival nights, your own private celebrations of extravagance. You set up two, maybe even three, flames. The room glows, every corner revealed in the flickering gold. You work faster, feverishly, trying to do in one night what might otherwise take a week. But the wax disappears faster than time. The stubs dwindle. The light becomes a taunt, a promise that cannot be kept. By midnight, you are back to a single guttering wick, the shadows crowding in as if angry at your arrogance. You think of the legends of learned men in distant cities with great windows and lamps fueled by oil, by whale fat, by mysterious substances you have never seen. You imagine scholars poring over books and maps, their rooms warm, their ink never frozen, their hands clean. You suspect this is a lie, or at least a story told to keep men like you dreaming. In reality, even the richest scholar depends on the uncertain flare of candlelight, on eyes that are failing and hands that cannot quite make the lines straight. There is a particular agony to mistakes made by candlelight, an accidental smear, a drop of sweat or wax, a misread word, and a day's work is ruined. You try to scrape the parchment, but it tears, leaving a wound that cannot be hidden. You contemplate starting over. The prospect is crushing, but what choice do you have? You salvage what you can. Sometimes the best maps are the ones that hide their wounds with a flourish, a hill that covers a blotch, a river that curves to hide a tear. You become an artist in concealment, a master of improvisation. Outside, the village is silent. Dogs bark in the distance. Somewhere, a child cries, Or perhaps it is just the wind howling under the door. The world feels impossibly large and impossibly small all at once. You are alone with your flickering candle, your stubborn tools, and your endless doubts. You think about giving up, but you keep working, not out of hope, but out of habit. The maps must be finished, even if they are never seen, even if they are never believed. The candle finally burns itself out, drowning its own flame in a puddle of molten wax. The room is swallowed by darkness. You sit for a moment, blind, listening to your own breath, feeling the ache in your hands and the weight in your chest. Then, slowly, you gather your things, blow gently on the ink to help it dry, and crawl into your cold bed, the day's failures heavy on your mind. Tomorrow, you will do it all again and again until your eyes give out or your luck runs dry. This is the life of a medieval cartographer, measured in candle stubs and ruined maps, in mistakes and small victories, in stubbornness and exhaustion. You might believe your work depends on knowledge, on observation, on that peculiar blend of stubbornness and imagination required to trace a path through an indifferent world. But more than anything, your entire existence as a cartographer hinges on the miracle of paper. And paper, in this century and this place, is rarer than kindness. You count your sheets like a miser counts his coins, a dozen pieces if you are lucky, odd scraps, rough at the edges, wrinkled and watermarked by their journeys through other hands and lesser fates. None of it is new. New paper is for lords, for churchmen, for those who pay with gold and not with sweat. What you have was rescued from the bottom of trunks, scavenged from merchants' waste, and, more than once, peeled from the insides of abandoned ledgers, where only half the page has been used. Even that is a stroke of fortune. Parchment is a different beast, more robust, more dignified, and vastly more expensive. Made from the skin of calves or sheep, prepared with a patience you will never afford, it glows softly in candlelight, hinting at a world where maps might endure for generations. You have touched true parchment only a handful of times, and always with hands trembling from awe or fear. Most of the time, you are left with its ghost. Slivers of reused prayer books, the faded sermons and penitential psalms barely scraped away to make room for your trembling lines. There is no shame in erasing the past. You do it out of necessity. You scrape away the blackened words with your blunt knife, cringing each time the blade snags and threatens to tear through. The ancient letters, Latin usually, or some saint's forgotten tongue, linger beneath your ink like curses, curses, faintly visible no matter how much you press and scrawl and try to overwrite them. Sometimes you think you see the shape of an angel under a crooked river, or a bishop's admonition beneath a cluster of trees. You wonder dimly whether the prayers on your maps make them luckier or simply heavier with guilt. On rare, exceptional days, you barter for scraps from the monastery scribe. He knows your need, and he knows your poverty. He doles out pieces just large enough for a single village, a stretch of road, a tangled wood. The rest he burns or sells for shoe linings. You hand over coins you cannot spare, and in return you are given a wedge of parchment, soft as a child's cheek, already bearing the faint outline of some saint's halo. You work on it with reverence, careful not to waste a millimeter, fitting every path and copse and boundary stone into the smallest possible space. Sometimes, when desperation is absolute, you patch together smaller scraps. Your map becomes a mad quilt of textures and colors: brown where rain seeped through a bag, yellow where fat dripped from a candle, gray where mildew crept in and left its signature. No one is fooled, least of all you. You press the pieces flat beneath a heavy pot, stitch them together with thread or paste, and hope the seams hold just long enough to get paid. It is not just the paper itself that is rare. Each sheet comes with a hidden history of struggle and indignity. You have spent hours kneeling in kitchens, scraping char from the bottoms of pots in exchange for a square of wrapping paper. You have fished wadded, greasy slips from the gutter after a market day, drying them with a stone on your windowsill. Once you fought off a dog for a fragment that proved on closer inspection to be nothing but an old meat wrapper. The smell never entirely left. There are rules you must follow, though no one teaches them. Never use a whole sheet unless you are certain of payment. Never start a new piece at night. Wait for daylight, for steadier hands and steadier minds. Never trust the promises of those who claim they will bring more next week. Never discard a mistake. Turn the sheet, scrape the blots, and begin again. Of course, all of this means your maps are a mess. Lines cross over stains, hills bulge to hide wormholes, roads swerve unexpectedly where a piece of parchment ends or a patch begins. Rivers fade away at the edge of a reused letter, their sources lost to the demands of frugality. When a client asks why the forest looks so much larger than reality, you shrug and say, it's a matter of perspective. Perspective in this world is another word for desperation. You sometimes dream of a future, a fantasy surely, where paper is as common as mud, where sheets arrive in neat stacks, clean and crisp, without history or smell or stains. In this vision, you make copies of your maps, dozens or hundreds at a time. You imagine the luxury of making a mistake, tossing the ruined page aside and starting over. You imagine your hands no longer shaking when you take up your quill, no longer haunted by the fear of running out. But you always wake to the musty air and the careful rationing of your real, imperfect scraps. Each new mark is a gamble. There are no drafts, no idle sketches. Every line must count. You find yourself whispering silent prayers to the ghosts beneath your ink, promising you will not waste their sacrifice. When you must erase, you do so with care, scraping slowly, wincing as fibers lift and threaten to tear. When you make a mistake too big to hide, you improvise. A town moves, a river bends, the world shifts, one desperate correction at a time. When all else fails, You rely on memory. You mark the contours of hills and roads in your mind, sketching invisible maps on your palm with a bitten nail, holding each line as long as you can before it vanishes beneath the next demand for your attention. The mind is a poor substitute for paper, but it is all you have left. In the end, the rarity of paper is not just an inconvenience, it is a weight, a constant reminder that you do not belong among the scribes and scholars, that your work is always provisional, always at risk of being lost to the next fire, flood, or careless hand. You cling to each scrap as if it were your last, because in some cruel way it always is. And so you live day after day, night after night, chasing lines across a patchwork of borrowed surfaces, hoping that someday someone will look past the stains and blots and see not just desperation, but the faint outline of the world as you once dreamed it could be. Your profession is a contradiction. To be needed is to be distrusted. To be paid is to be endangered. The day comes, inevitably, when you are called upon not to sketch your own idle imaginings, but to produce a map for someone else, a real map for a real patron, with all the real risks that entails. It begins, as these things always do, with a knock at your door that is too firm, too certain. No one in the village visits you for neighborly conversation. Your existence is tolerated at best. You open the door to a stranger, or worse, a familiar face, set in the grim mask of someone who would rather be anywhere else. This time, it is the miller, sweating despite the cold, his face red, and his eyes darting with the quick calculation of a man who knows secrets are currency. He wants a map. Of what, you ask, as if you have choices. He wants to know where the Lord's men patrol, how far the old forest reaches, how many fields are hidden from the tax collector's eyes. You listen, nodding, because to do anything else is to invite trouble. But each word he speaks is a stone added to the weight you already carry. Making a map for a neighbor is less about truth than about rumor and politics. The fields shift with the gossip. The forest grows and shrinks with every retelling. The miller's wife insists the old well lies to the east, but the blacksmith's apprentice is certain it is west. The paths, the boundaries, the secret tracks through the undergrowth, all are known and unknown, marked by memory and fear more than by fact. You realize quickly that your map must flatter, must soothe, must not show anything that might be used as evidence or accusation. You begin, as always, with what you remember and what you dare to guess. The old road, half buried by brambles, the cluster of trees where children are warned not to play. You draw and redraw, pausing to scrape away a name or move a field's edge when your visitor's brow creases in suspicion. Your ink is running low, the candle gutters, your stomach churns with unease. The miller watches, never quite trusting you to work alone, his hand occasionally brushing the knife at his belt. It is not a threat, exactly. It is a reminder. When you finish, you hand over the map with a muttered warning. Do not show this to the wrong person. Do not say, I made it. The miller grunts and leaves a few coins, less than promised, but more than you dared hope. You tuck them away, feeling their cold comfort in your palm. They will buy bread, perhaps a little meat, if you are careful, but they will not buy safety. Your first real commission is a revelation, not in skill, not in reward, but in peril. Word spreads quickly in a village. The next day, the reeve comes by, friendly in the way that only men with power can afford to be. He wants to see the map. He asks about the boundaries, about who told you what, about whether you have drawn anything for the Lord's enemies. You demur, you dissemble, you promise to draw whatever he needs for the right price. His smile is wide and thin, and you realize that maps are not simply tools. They are weapons. You have armed the wrong man. This is the first time you burn a map. You do it at night, behind your hut, the flames licking up the edges, the ink hissing as it bubbles and vanishes. You stand in the cold, watching the paper curl, and feel no triumph, only relief. In the morning, the ground is black and empty. You do not mention it to anyone, not even yourself. The dangers are not only from those in authority. The villagers begin to look at you differently, with a mixture of awe and suspicion. A map, after all, is a kind of magic, a proof that someone has seen what others only know by hearsay. They wonder how you know where the paths lead, how you can measure the distance between the church and the river without walking every step. Children whisper that you can see through walls, that your eyes are as sharp as a hawk's. You let them believe it, better fear than contempt. But there are others who are not so easily impressed. A group of men, strangers, faces hidden beneath cloaks, waylay you as you walk to the next village. They want to know what you have drawn, for whom, and why. Their voices are soft, but their hands are hard. You give them nothing, and they let you go, but not before reminding you that a cartographer who draws the wrong thing for the wrong person is a liability. The lesson is clear. You are watched. Your maps grow more careful. You begin to keep two copies, one for the patron, one for yourself, and sometimes a third hidden under the floorboards. You invent paths that do not exist. Place obstacles where none are found, just in case the map falls into the wrong hands. You tell yourself that this is prudence, but you know it is fear. There are moments when you regret the whole enterprise. It would be easier, perhaps, to work the fields, to haul water, to accept the daily grind of ordinary poverty. But even as you think this, you know it is a lie. You would wither under such monotony. The act of drawing, of making sense of the world, is as much a part of you as hunger or breath. You cannot give it up, not even when it puts you in danger. Your commissions become more frequent, each one a little riskier than the last. Sometimes it is a merchant who wants to know the best road to market. Sometimes it is a widow who needs proof that her field is her own, that the boundary stone was moved in the night by greedy neighbors. Each time you listen, you draw, you advise. Each time You are drawn deeper into the tangled web of secrets and the threats that define village life. In this way, you learn that a map is never neutral. It is always a story, told from one perspective for one purpose. To draw a map is to choose a side, whether you mean to or not. Each commission is a new danger, a new test of your ability to navigate not only the land, but the shifting loyalties and silent accusations of those around you. You realize finally that being a cartographer is not simply about lines and symbols. It is about survival, about knowing who to trust and when to lie, and how to vanish when the questions become too pointed. You are no longer just a maker of maps. You are a keeper of secrets, a broker of danger, a stranger everywhere, even in your own skin. And so you carry on, your pockets a little heavier, your sleep a little lighter, your eyes forever scanning not just the horizon, but the faces in every shadow. You are needed, you are used, you are never, ever safe. Every map is a lie of omission. It shows roads, rivers, and boundaries, but it cannot show the raw, grinding hostility that waits beyond the village edge. Each time you step outside the crude wooden gate, if your village even bothers with such a thing, you leave behind the relative predictability of mud, gossip, and routine for the far more honest dangers of the open world. You go because you must. Maps are not made from memory alone, and rumors become tangled with each retelling. To trace a road, to chart a ford, to confirm that a hill is more than just the invention of a superstitious shepherd, you must see for yourself. So you walk. You do not stride. You do not march. You trudge, shoulders hunched, eyes wary. The path is never empty, and it is never safe. There is the forest, dark, close, rank with the smell of rot and last autumn's decay. The trees are older than memory, their roots clutching at the path, tripping the careless and swallowing the foolish. In the undergrowth, you hear movement. Sometimes it is just a squirrel or a crow. Sometimes it is something larger. You carry a walking stick, but you know it is little defense against wolves or, worse, other men. Bandits, you learn early, are not a story told to frighten children. They are men like any others, except hungrier and less bound by the rules of civility. If you are lucky, they are after money or food. If you are unlucky, they decide your compass or your boots or even your hands are worth taking. You make yourself small. You travel at dawn when even thieves are sleeping, and you never, ever walk the same route twice. There are the fields, too, but they are not always friendly. A lone cartographer, walking with a bundle of papers and a strange ticking instrument, is a tempting target for suspicion. More than once, you have been mistaken for a thief, a spy, or, when a harvest has failed, a bringer of bad luck. The local peasants do not need proof. They need only a scapegoat. You learn to keep moving, to never linger near a hedge or a well, to keep your head down when shouts rise in the distance. The weather is your constant enemy. The roads, if they can be called that, are strips of churned mud in spring and autumn, bone breaking ruts in summer, sheets of treacherous ice in winter. Rain soaks through your clothes, turning parchment to pulp. The sun burns your skin, the wind chaps your lips and steals your warmth. Your boots are always too thin, your coat always too short. The world, you realize, is not designed for comfort or for accuracy. It cares nothing for your lines and measurements. But you go on because to stop is to admit defeat. Each new stretch of road is a battlefield, every stream a potential drowning. When you pause to sketch, to jot a quick note, or measure the length of a shadow, you are exposed. Every moment of concentration is an invitation to animals, to men, to the invisible spirits the villagers swear by. You do not scoff at these spirits. You have seen enough odd things, felt enough cold dread, to know that some dangers have no name. Nights outside are the worst. Sometimes you must travel far, too far to return by dusk. You search for shelter, a hollow tree, a ruined shed, a pile of stones that offers even the illusion of safety. Sleep comes in snatches, interrupted by every crackle of leaves, every distant howl. You huddle in your thin cloak, counting the hours until dawn. Your dreams, when you have them, are fevered and sharp. You are always running, always pursued, always lost. Food is never certain. You carry what you can: bread gone stale, cheese gone sour, a flask of brackish water. Sometimes you barter with villagers, offering a scrap of a map for a bowl of watery stew or a chunk of gristly meat. More often, you go hungry, watching for berries, wild onions, the occasional mushroom. You have learned which are safe, which will kill you, and which will only make you wish they had. In the rare moments when you meet another traveler, you are cautious. You nod, exchange a greeting, sometimes share a fire. If the other seems less desperate than you, information is traded like gold. Who controls the road ahead? Which bridge has collapsed? Where the wolves have been sighted? Trust is never given, only rented by the hour. And all the while, you map. You measure distances by counting steps, by the ache in your legs, by the time it takes for the sun to move from one crooked branch to another. Your notes are smudged, your drawings hurried. Each map is a compromise with fear. You learn the truth. The world beyond the village does not care for your craft. It will not protect you, or reward you, or mourn you if you disappear. It will cover your bones with leaves and mud and move on, unmapped and unimpressed. Yet somehow you persist. Each time you return to the village, battered and hungry, with new marks on your skin and new knowledge in your head, you are a little less innocent, a little more wary. The world is hostile, yes, but it is also endlessly, brutally real. And it is your task, your curse, to try, against all odds, to pin its shadows to parchment, if only for a moment. If you are hoping for gratitude or even mild curiosity, you have chosen the wrong century and the wrong profession. A cartographer is not a craftsman, not a scholar, not a priest. To the villagers, You are an oddity at best, a threat at worst. Your ink stained fingers, your pockets full of scraps and mysterious objects, your habit of staring at landscapes with squinting calculation. None of this endears you to anyone. People here have long memories and short patience. They know what belongs, and more importantly, what does not. You notice it most when you come back from your travels, mud caked and bone tired, with another half finished map rolled beneath your arm. Eyes follow you along the lane, narrowing as you approach. Children are ushered indoors or called back from the well. Gossip does not wait until you are out of earshot. It rides the wind, harsh and unsubtle, following you like a curse. He's the one who draws the devil's footprints. Why's he measuring the land, eh? Whose side is he on? A peasant, scraping weeds from between the stones, pauses and watches you. His eyes are red with suspicion, his grip on the hoe white knuckled. You greet him with a nod, polite but distant, and he spits in the dirt. You keep walking. Your business is elsewhere, and the less said, the better. Suspicion takes many forms. Some villagers simply avoid you, crossing the road when you approach, pretending not to see you at market, even as they peer from beneath their hoods to watch you haggle for a bit of stale bread. Others confront you, their words edged with anger and fear. What are you writing down? Who pays you? Are you counting what's not yours? Questions with no safe answers. You learn to speak as little as possible, to answer questions with questions, to act harmless, nearly invisible. Worse are those who fancy themselves clever, who see your tools and your maps and think you must be a spy, a servant of the local lord, or worse, an agent of the tax collectors. There are always rumors of new levies, of land being measured so it can be taken, taxed, or seized. He'll mark your field and you'll lose it. See if you don't, whispers one woman to another. You are held responsible for everything from rising rents to failed crops. A sick cow, a broken plow, a child's fever, somehow it all leads back to you and your infernal drawings. There is a deeper fear, the kind that hides beneath layers of ignorance and desperation. Your craft, after all, is dangerously close to magic. The idea that a man can look at the world and reduce it to marks on paper, marks that others can follow, that can guide the living or mislead them. This is power, and power frightens. There are those who believe you can curse a field by drawing it the wrong way, or invite spirits by naming a stream that should remain unnamed. More than once, you have returned to your hut to find a crude charm nailed to the door, or a dead bird left as warning. Some call you a wizard, and not always in jest. Children dare each other to touch your maps or snatch your quill, as if handling your tools will bring misfortune or strange dreams. The local priest eyes you with holy suspicion, torn between the church's respect for learning and its hatred for anything it cannot control. You cross yourself when he passes, just as he does, and the moment passes like the shadow of a hawk. For every open hostility, there is a quieter suspicion, a reluctance to speak when you enter a room, a sudden silence around the fire, the way conversations turn to other topics the instant you appear. Sometimes you think you can hear your own name, misshapen and whispered, threaded through talk of wolves and taxes and the price of oats. You become adept at camouflage, at becoming part of the scenery. You carry your maps rolled tightly, hidden in your cloak, your tools wrapped and tucked away. You move with purpose, but without hurry, never lingering too long in one place, never giving the impression of listening too closely. Your eyes are always downcast, your posture humble, yet, for all their suspicions, people need you. When a boundary stone goes missing, when a dispute arises over a patch of forest or a right of way, when the Lord's men come asking awkward questions, then, suddenly, your skills are useful. You are called to walk the land with the disputing parties, to mark lines and settle arguments. Even then, no one quite trusts your answer. If the map favors one, the other is sure you have been bribed. If it splits the difference, both parties are convinced you are plotting against them. Neutrality is a fiction, and everyone knows it. On rare occasions, a villager will approach you in privet, late at night or just before dawn. Their manner is furtive, their requests quiet but urgent. Mark my field as larger, add a path that never existed, erase a neighbor's orchard. For a little extra, a secret favor, you are expected to bend reality, to draw the world not as it is, but as it is wished to be. You become an accomplice in their petty wars, an architect of grudges and false hopes. Over time, you develop an instinct for survival, a nose for trouble, an ear for rumor, an eye for malice. You know when to leave, when to hide, when to lie. You keep a coin hidden in your boot, a spare map buried beneath the hearth, a knife under your pillow. It is not paranoia if they really are watching. Despite it all, you persist. You do not expect gratitude or friendship, only tolerance, and even that is earned anew every day. You are the stranger in their midst, the one who measures and writes and knows too much. Suspicion is the air you breathe, the water you drink, the bed you sleep on. It is unpleasant, but it is honest. In a world ruled by ignorance and fear, your greatest achievement may simply be surviving long enough to draw one more map, to walk one more field, to leave behind some faint record that you too existed. You live with the knowledge that at any moment your body might betray you. Disease is not an occasional misfortune, it is a permanent companion, as reliable as the mud and the hunger. Every ache is suspicious, every chill is ominous, and every cough from the house next door is cause for a silent prayer and an extra helping of dread. You are not alone in this. Sickness haunts every lane and every hovel. The difference is that you, a wanderer and a stranger, are always one infection away from ruin. It starts, as it always does, with something small, a cut on your finger from sharpening a quill, a blister from walking all day in boots that have forgotten what comfort means. You ignore it at first. You have no time for weakness. But by evening, your finger is red and swollen, throbbing with a heat that has nothing to do with your cold candlelit room. You suck at it, wrap it in the cleanest scrap of rag you can find, and hope for the best. You know better than to ask for help. In a village like this, sickness is private, sometimes even shameful. Your neighbors are well versed in the superstitions of illness. A fever is a punishment, a swelling is a sign, a rash is evidence of someone's secret sin. Remedies are passed down in whispers and with many warnings. Chew this root, burn that leaf, tie a red string around your wrist. You have seen it all, a poultice of mud and pig fat slapped on an open wound, a child forced to swallow ash and vinegar, an old man with festering sores being bled by a rusty knife under the approving eye of the local wise woman. The success rate is exactly what you would expect. When disease comes, it is never gentle. You see it first in the faces of the villagers, gray, sunken, eyes bright with fever and fear. There is no privacy, no dignity. The sick are laid out in smoky, cramped rooms, breathing in the same stale air, their coughs echoing through thin walls. The smell is unforgettable, a stew of sweat, rot, and desperation, barely disguised by bundles of dried herbs hung from the beams. As a traveler, your risks are multiplied. You move from place to place, breathing air in one cottage and then another, drinking from whatever cup is offered, eating whatever bread or cheese is not too obviously crawling with mold. You cannot afford to offend your hosts, even when their hospitality is as likely to kill you as to nourish you. You have learned to refuse food politely, to drink sparingly, to sleep with your mouth covered by your sleeve if the house reeks of illness. Sometimes none of it is enough. You remember your first real sickness. It was not dramatic, a dull ache in your belly, followed by days of weakness, endless trips outside, and a headache that would not leave. It was the water, you realized. Always the water. You lay in bed, too tired to move, watching the patterns of mold grow on the ceiling, wondering if this was the end. No one came. The villagers did not trust you enough to nurse you, and you were too afraid of their remedies to ask. You survived somehow, crawling back to health with the determination of someone who knows there is no other option. There are worse things than hunger or filth, the cough that never leaves, the sores that do not heal, the fever that comes in waves until it breaks your mind. These are the true terrors. You have seen what happens when the sweating sickness comes, or when the pox takes hold. People vanish, quietly, overnight. A hut is shuttered. A few weeks later, it is as if they never existed. The village closes around the absence, erasing the memory with silence and fresh mud. Medicine, such as it is a grim joke. The local wise woman claims knowledge passed down through generations. A handful of herbs for a stomach ache, a cold poultice for a fever, a bloodletting for anything she cannot name. The church offers prayers and holy water, the priest muttering Latin while the patient drowns in their own lungs. You know better than to expect miracles. The best remedies are caution and luck. If you are desperate, you turn to the traveling healer, the bone setter, who visits twice a year. His wagon is filled with jars and powders, with dried lizards and bundles of twigs. He promises cures for every ailment, from headaches to heartbreak. The villagers line up, clutching coins and hope, and he leaves with both. Sometimes he actually helps, sets a broken arm, pulls a rotting tooth, lances a boil with surprising skill. Mostly, he offers comfort, which is almost as valuable as medicine. You envy the rare scholars and monks who study disease and its causes, who collect books filled with diagrams of bones and organs, who debate the meaning of humors and prescribe mysterious powders from distant lands. Their world is one of theory, of argument, of learning for its own sake. Your world is one of mud, pain, and improvisation. You make do with what you have, and what you have is never enough. You keep a small stash of dried herbs in a pouch, a few leaves for tea, a sliver of bark for a fever. You wash your hands when you can, boil your water when you are able, and hope that your luck holds. When you feel the first stirrings of illness, you work faster, pushing to finish a map before you are forced to take to your bed. There is no one to look after you, no one to keep the fire burning or fetch water from the well. If you fall alone. Perhaps this is why you keep moving, why you never let yourself run for too long in any one place. Sickness, after all, is a hunter, and you are only as safe as your next horizon. You know that sooner or later it will find you. All you can do is hope to have a few more good days, a few more maps finished, a few more miles behind you before it claims its due. And if by some miracle you survive, if the fever breaks, the cough fades, the wound heals, you do not celebrate. You simply get up, slowly, carefully, testing your body's willingness to continue. You wash your hands, rinse your mouth, and go back to your work, knowing that the shadow of disease is never far behind. This is your medicine: endurance, caution, and the stubborn refusal to die. It is not much, but in a world like this, it is sometimes enough. Exhaustion is not a momentary inconvenience. It is the ground state of your existence, the water in which you swim, the shadow that lengthens with every passing day. You live in the company of fatigue, not the sharp, clean tiredness of a hard day's honest work, but the slow, grinding attrition that seeps into your bones and makes a mockery of hope. There is always one more task, one more emergency. Your body wakes in the morning already aching, as if the night offered no rest, but merely a different shade of weariness. The straw mattress bruises more than it cushions. Your pillow, a sack of rags, provides as much comfort as a stone. Sometimes you lie there before dawn, counting the heartbeats that echo in your skull, wondering if you have slept at all or merely endured the hours between dusk and dawn with your eyes closed and your mind running in circles. You rise not out of will, but out of necessity. The room is cold, your limbs are stiff, Your head is filled with the memory of 100 unfinished maps and unpaid debts. The day's obligations are waiting: water to fetch, ink to mix, lines to draw, boundaries to mark. The villagers expect you to be ready, available, useful. If you falter, there will be questions. If you complain, there will be silence, or worse, suspicion. So you drag yourself upright, shake out your aching arms, and begin again. Your hands tremble when you take up the quill. Your vision swims in the early light, and the lines you draw are never quite as straight as you wish. It is a struggle to focus, to remember which commission is due, which field belongs to which neighbor, which rumor you are meant to believe. Your mind, like your body, is running on empty. Mistakes creep in. A path is drawn too short. A hill is misaligned. A name is spelled in reverse. You catch some of them, scrape away the ink, redraw the line, hope no one notices. Others slip through and become part of the world, a silent record of your fatigue. Food does not help. The bread is hard. The cheese is sour. The water tastes of iron and neglect. You chew and swallow and feel no relief. Hunger, like exhaustion, becomes background noise. You eat only because not eating would be worse. Sometimes you forget whether you have eaten at all. Some days you work through the night, driven by fear or the need to finish a job before a client loses patience. Candlelight blurs your vision, ink stains your fingers and lips. You nod off over your maps, jolting awake as your forehead bumps the table. The rats move more boldly in the darkness, emboldened by your weakness. When finally you crawl into bed, you fall into a sleep so shallow it might as well be waking. You dream of endless roads, of maps that redraw themselves faster than you can chase them, of voices calling you back to tasks left unfinished. The body keeps score. Your back aches from hunching over your table, your knees from walking miles of muddy roads, your shoulders from carrying your supplies, your eyes from squinting at faint lines and tiny letters. Some pains come and go, others settle in and become old friends. Your hands are raw and calloused, cracked from cold and ink, your fingernails bitten to the quick. You limp more often than you care to admit. You learn to fear illness, not just for its pain, but for the extra burden it lays upon your exhausted frame. A fever is a thief, stealing what little energy you have. A cough is a drumbeat of warning. You work through it all because you must. There is no one to pick up your work if you falter, no safety net, no one who will draw your maps or fetch your water or chase away the rats. Even your mind grows weary. Fatigue sharpens your temper, dulls your curiosity, and makes the world seem narrower, colder, more unforgiving. You forget words, misplace tools, lose track of time. Conversations blur, instructions slip away, memories fade. Some days you catch yourself staring at the wall, lost for long minutes in the movement of a shadow, unable to remember what you were meant to be doing. There is no escape. The village does not slow to accommodate your weakness. The world outside offers only new forms of labor, new dangers. You cannot pause, cannot beg for rest. Rest is not a reward, but an indulgence, and those who indulge too long simply vanish. The exhausted are quickly replaced. Sometimes, in rare moments of clarity, you wonder how long you can endure. You try to remember a time when you were not tired, when your muscles did not ache, when your mind was not fogged with worry. The memory slips away, replaced by the pressing needs of the present. You console yourself with small victories, a line drawn straight, a map delivered on time, a meal that fills your stomach. It is not enough, but it is something. If there is any comfort, it is in the knowledge that everyone else is just as tired as you. The blacksmith's hands shake. The baker's eyes are rimmed with red. The peasants trudge through their days in silence. Fatigue is universal, democratic, inescapable. It is the water in which you all drown together, pretending to swim. So you keep going. Each day, you rise, you work, you rest as best you can, and you begin again. Your exhaustion is not heroic, not unique. It is simply life, and life, for a medieval cartographer, is measured not in triumphs, but in the ability to endure, one weary, heavy step at a time. In a world ruled by faith, the lines you draw on parchment can easily be mistaken for lines drawn in defiance of God. The church is everywhere. Its bell marks the hours. Its cross marks the graves. Its priest marks the boundaries between the saved and the suspect. And you, with your strange profession, live always in the shadow of suspicion and grace, a tightrope walker with neither safety net nor applause. The church's power is absolute and diffuse. Every village has its priest, every region its bishop, every stone and every crumbling chapel is stamped with authority that is both spiritual and very, very real. The church reads and writes, keeps the records, and decides which stories are worth telling. As a cartographer, you are both tool and threat. You record the land, but you also question it. You make the invisible visible, and that, in this age, is both miraculous and perilous. You attend Mass because not attending would be social suicide. The priest sees you arrive and gives you a look that is equal parts welcome and warning. You stand in the cold nave, surrounded by the familiar faces of villagers, feeling always just a little apart. You cross yourself, you mumble the responses, you kneel on aching knees, but your eyes wander, measuring the church's nave, counting the paces to the altar, wondering at the thickness of the walls. You cannot help it. Every space is a map, waiting to be drawn. The church is keeper of secrets, and you have learned to approach its favor with care. Sometimes, a priest is a man of learning, curious about the wider world, eager to discuss maps and books and the shape of creation. He will show you the church's own records, maps of parish boundaries, lists of tithes and rents, legends in careful Latin script. He may ask to see your tools, your maps, even ask you to copy a border or annotate a deed. These are good days, rare days, when your knowledge buys you a few hours of acceptance and, if you are lucky, a bowl of thick soup and a piece of bread. But just as often, the priest is a man of fear and suspicion, tasked with rooting out heresy and protecting the flock from corruption, spiritual and otherwise. This sort of priest eyes your compasses and rulers as instruments of pride, or worse, of arrogance against God. Who are you to measure what only God can measure? He might ask. Do you claim to know the length of the earth, the depth of the river, the breadth of the Lord's creation? There is no safe answer. To claim ignorance is to invite mockery. To claim knowledge is to invite accusation. You learn to speak carefully, to couch your words in humility. I only try to describe, Father, never to explain. I put down what my eyes see, not what my soul understands. It is a dance, awkward and exhausting, but necessary. Too much confidence, too much curiosity, and you risk being marked as a heretic, or worse, a sorcerer. You have heard stories, everyone has, of men burned for less. A scholar who drew the moon too precisely, a healer who knew too much about plants, a woman who could read the stars. Sometimes the church's suspicion is less direct, but no less stifling. You notice that your maps are not at always welcomed, especially when they conflict with older, sacred accounts. The boundaries you draw might contradict the parish records. The forest you show as shrinking might once have been the site of a miracle. The road you map too close to a holy well invites rumors. Are you profaning the sacred? Are you revealing what should remain hidden? There are rituals, formal and informal, for blessing new fields, new roads, new buildings. Sometimes you are invited to attend. The priest sprinkles water, mutters prayers, wards off evil, asks for the land's fruitfulness. You stand at the edge, holding your map, hoping that the blessing will extend to your work as well. On rare occasions, you are asked to mark the site of a vision, a relic, a saint's footprint. Your hand trembles. You are acutely aware that to get it wrong is not just a technical error, but a spiritual one. You have heard more than once the whispered warning, the Lord made the world and the devil made maps. It is a joke, perhaps, but only half a joke. To reduce the world to lines is to flirt with blasphemy. The very act of drawing a map is an assertion that the world is knowable, measurable, perhaps even conquerable, a dangerous idea. In the great cities, the church's attitude toward cartographers is more nuanced. In monasteries, monks labor over maps of the world, drawing the boundaries of Christendom, filling in blank spaces with dragons or the words, "Here be monsters." They are educated, sometimes curious, sometimes supportive of your work, so long as it does not contradict scripture or challenge dogma. Some of the finest maps are kept behind monastery walls, never to be seen by commoners. You dream of seeing them just once to compare your own paltry efforts with those grand visions. But you are not a monk. You are a wandering tradesman, a layman, a man whose maps are made with more guesswork than revelation. You keep your ambitions small, your curiosity hidden, your words humble. You remind yourself that the church is both gatekeeper and judge. A wrong word, a wrong drawing, a misplaced cross on a map, and you could find yourself before an inquisitor explaining why you thought it necessary to name every hill and stream. You have learned that silence is sometimes the most eloquent answer. When you finish a map, you say a silent prayer over it, not because you believe it will save you, but because it is better to be safe than sorry. You tuck a small cross into your pouch, a gift from a friendly priest, and hope it wards off both suspicion and bad luck. Your life is lived in the margins, between faith and reason, knowledge and ignorance, gratitude and suspicion. You make maps, but you also make peace every day with the power that oversees all. In the end, you hope that your humility, your caution, and your silent prayers are enough to keep you on the right side of both parchment and providence. Evenings in the village are not a time for merriment or peace. Darkness comes early, swallowing the meager light of day and forcing everyone inside, behind doors barred not only against the cold, but against all the unnamed things that roam the night. For you, a stranger in all but name, night is a time of uneasy rest, and, more often than not, of talk that is both gift and curse. You settle into your hut, the shadows stretching long and deep across the floor. Your candle, if you can spare one, burns low and sullen, flickering against the drafts that creep under the door. Sometimes, if the evening's work has left you with enough energy, you will take your maps and tools and sit by the fire in the house of a rare host. But more often, you remain alone, surrounded by the sounds of the world closing in, a dog barking, the thud of boots in muddy lanes, a baby's thin wail piercing the hush. Yet, you are never fully isolated. The villagers, for all their suspicion, are drawn by curiosity and need. As the firewood burns down and the air turns thick with smoke and fatigue, the conversations begin. Sometimes it is the host's family, sometimes a neighbor who drifts in on some invented errand, sometimes a band of children pressing close to the hearth, hoping for stories and warmth. Everyone talks in the dark. The night is too long, too empty to be faced in silence. The talk is not kind or gentle. It is rough, practical, sharp with hunger and resentment, flecked with laughter as bitter as wormwood. They speak of their lives, of harvests lost to blight, of livestock stolen or vanished in the forest, of debts and bargains and feuds that have lasted so long no one remembers how they began. You listen and you learn. Every tale is a puzzle piece, a scrap of knowledge that might one day become a feature on your map or a warning in your memory. Stories twist and knot together. Someone claims the old bridge was swept away in a flood. Another insists it was cursed by a witch. A third recalls seeing the stones themselves crawling downstream like animals. A boy brags about exploring the abandoned mill. A woman warns of wolves that walk on two legs. A man mutters about lights in the forest. that are neither torches nor stars. The line between truth and fantasy is as thin as the skin on a boiled onion and just as easy to tear. You nod and prompt and never contradict. Your role is not to judge, but to gather, sifting fact from fiction by weight and repetition. You notice which details recur, where the paths cross, where travelers disappear, which wells go bad when the moon is new. You store it all away, making mental notes to check a certain bend in the road, a patch of marsh rumored to swallow horses, an ancient tree said to bleed when cut. Sometimes someone will ask about your own journeys. Where have you come from? What have you seen? What dangers lie on the other side of the map? Your answers are vague, shaped by caution and the need to avoid seeming either too ignorant or too knowing. You mention towns far off, roads you barely remember, a hilltop where a ruined tower once stood. You learn to tell stories of your own, safe, harmless tales that do not mark you as a bringer of misfortune or a holder of dangerous secrets. The fire burns lower. Children doze, slumped against their mothers' skirts. The men grow quieter, staring into the flames as if hoping to see tomorrow in the coals. The women knit, mend, and sometimes cry, their voices thin as the night wind. You sense the exhaustion beneath their words, the burden of a life that never lets up. The evening is a long reckoning with disappointment and loss, a shared endurance test for which there is no prize. Every so often, the talk turns darker. Someone asks, too casually, if you have seen the footprints by the river, if you have heard the rumors of soldiers marching near the border, if you know why the Lord's men are counting cattle this year when they did not last. Eyes turn to you, not hostile, not friendly, just searching for reassurance or a scapegoat. You offer what little you can, a story that is neither too hopeful nor too grim, a gentle lie to help the fire burn a little longer. These evenings teach you as much about people as about places. You learn who is generous and who is bitter, who is quick to anger and who bears grudges in silence. You see how old wounds fester and new alliances form, how every laugh hides a fear and every kindness has its price. You realize, slowly, that mapping the world is not just a matter of hills and rivers, but of loyalties and secrets, of memories kept alive by endless repetition. At times, you envy the simplicity of the tales you hear. The monsters in the forest are easier to fight than the monsters inside the human heart. A bridge can be rebuilt. Trust, once broken, is gone for good. You wonder if your maps, for all their details, will ever capture what really matters. The unseen lines that bind and divide, the histories whispered in the dark. Eventually, the night grows too heavy even for talk. One by one, your companions drift away. The fire collapses into ash, and you are left alone with the echoes of words and the stubborn glow of your dwindling candle. You roll up your maps, stretch out on your scratchy bed, and close your eyes. The stories follow you into sleep, mingling with dreams of roads that lead nowhere, rivers that flow backward, villages lost in mist. You know that tomorrow will bring more of the same, more hunger, more suspicion, more stories. But for tonight at least, you have survived another darkness, another reckoning with the world and its people, and that, for a cartographer, is almost enough. Few things fill you with such dread and faint hope as the rare necessity of traveling to town. The village is miserable, yes, but it is a misery, you know, a misery that has routines and rules. Town is different. It is larger, louder, and hungrier, filled with more people than you care to count, each one a stranger and a possible threat. Still, there are things you can only get in town: a new stub of candle, perhaps a scrap of better parchment, maybe even news that does not come filtered through 3 layers of rumor. The journey itself is a trial. You begin before dawn, feet numb in your boots, sack slung across your shoulder, maps hidden deep within layers of patched cloth. The road is not so much a road as a suggestion, a rut of mud and frozen puddles, flanked by fields stripped bare by winter and woods that look the same in every direction. There are places where the track disappears altogether, swallowed by water or choked with brambles. You walk with your head down, eyes darting, always listening for sounds that do not belong: hoofbeats, voices, the distant laughter of men with nothing to lose. Travel is slow. You share the road with carts, creaking under the weight of turnips, with drovers urging skinny sheep through the muck, with merchants grumbling at every delay. Sometimes you are overtaken by a mounted lord or a priest's procession, and you step aside quickly, eyes lowered, mouth shut. Travelers eye each other with suspicion. No one is truly at ease. Everyone knows that between settlements, you are alone and unprotected, your fate your own. Bandits haunt the woods, and their appetite for coin is matched only by their appetite for cruelty. You have learned to carry nothing of value in your outer pockets, to keep your compass and your best quill hidden close to your chest, to feign poverty even more convincingly than you actually possess it. Once you watched a merchant's cart overturned in a ditch, his goods vanished, his face purple with bruises. The villagers found him 2 days later, stripped of everything but shame. You never travel with company unless forced. It is easier to be ignored than to be noticed. When you finally reach the outskirts of town, you are greeted first by the smell: a sour stew of rotting food, dung, coal smoke, and too many people crammed into too little space. The gates, if the town has them, are watched by bored guards who eye every newcomer as a potential criminal, rebel, or carrier of disease. You present your reason for entry: buying supplies, seeking a commission, whatever seems least suspicious, and hope your tongue does not stumble. Bribes are sometimes expected, sometimes punished. It is hard to guess which. Inside, the world is a chaos of noise and mud. Streets twist and double back, bordered by houses that lean over the lanes, as if trying to listen to each other's secrets. Beggars line the walls, hands outstretched, eyes hollow with hunger or illness. Sellers hawk their wares in a dozen dialects, their voices rising above the clatter of carts and the curses of men unloading sacks of flour or barrels of ale. Chickens, pigs, children all compete for space, for food, for survival. Your errands are simple in theory, difficult in practice. You bargain for a scrap of good parchment, risking half your savings for a sheet that is only slightly moldy at the edges. Ink is dearer than gold, and you take what you can get, hoping the new batch will last longer than the last, hoping the merchant has not thinned it with ditch water. Candles, if you can afford them, are precious beyond words. You buy two, knowing you will ration their light with the care of a miser. There is also the business of news, if you are wise enough to keep your mouth shut and your ears open. In town, information is a commodity. You linger near the alehouse door, listening to the talk of wars and taxes, of famines in the north, of lords falling out of favor, and villages vanishing in the night. The line between rumor and fact is as blurred here as it is at home, but at least it is a wider river to drink from. Sometimes you hear news that chills you, a new law about travelers, a crackdown on suspicious professions, a cartographer arrested for spying. You file these details away and make yourself even smaller. You might see a friendly face, a priest who recognizes you, a merchant who once bought a map from you, a scribe who nods as you pass. But these connections are thin, easily broken by the wrong word or a careless association. You do not linger. You do not advertise your trade. There are too many eyes, too many ears, too many ways for a stranger to vanish in a crowd. Leaving town is not easier than entering. You check your pouch, your pockets, your sack, counting and recounting your possessions, making sure nothing has slipped away in the confusion. The road back is longer than you remember, the mud deeper, your legs heavier with every step. Night sometimes catches you before you reach the village, and you spend an hour or two in a ditch or beneath a hedge, shivering and listening to the world breathe and growl around you. Yet, for all the filth and the danger, there is a flicker of hope in every journey to town. It is a place where change happens, however slowly. Here, you see books with strange scripts, tools you never imagined, travelers with stories from beyond your world. For a moment, you remember that the world is bigger than your hut, your village, your maps. You return home with your supplies, meager though they are, and the faint, dangerous knowledge that things might, someday, be different. And then you light your new candle, and the world shrinks again to your shadow on the wall, the sound of your own breath, and the quiet, endless work of survival. You might imagine that the maps you create, each painstaking line, each sleepless night, will endure, that your work, fragile and precious, will be treasured, preserved, passed from hand to hand as evidence of a world made knowable. You would be wrong. In this life, the fate of your maps is as uncertain and unglamorous as your own. A map begins as a hope. You lay out your best parchment, smooth your trembling hand, and press the quill to the page, imagining that this time, perhaps, the lines will stay where you put them. Each feature is marked with anxious precision. The roads you have walked, the bridges you have risked your neck to measure, the woods whose shadows still haunt your sleep. There is pride, sometimes, a swelling in your chest when a map is finished and almost beautiful, when the boundaries line up and the ink has not run. But the world does not care for beautiful things, especially not paper ones. Maps have 1,000 enemies. Damp creeps in through the roof and the floor, curling the edges, turning bold lines into blurred smears. Rats nibble at corners. Mice chew tunnels through your labor. In summer, the flies come, laying eggs in the glue that binds your sheets. In winter, the cold makes the ink brittle and the parchment crack. Every element seems to conspire against you. And then there are the people. The fate of a map is almost always to be misunderstood, abused, or ignored. Sometimes a client takes your work with a grunt, glances at it, and uses it to wrap cheese or plug a drafty window. A merchant might roll it into a tube and forget it in the bottom of a cart, where rain and manure will do the rest. A village elder may tack it to a wall for all to see, only for the wind or an angry child to rip it down. Once you watched in silent horror as a laborer used a ruined map to wipe his nose and toss it on a midden heap. If you are lucky, a map is copied crudely, hastily, by someone who barely understands what it is for. Each new version loses a little more. A field misplaced, a river erased, a symbol invented to fill a hole. Soon, the copies bear only a passing resemblance to your original, like a rumor passed through too many mouths. You recognize the skeleton of your work, but all the flesh is gone, replaced by someone else's errors and guesses. Most maps disappear. A storm soaks through the thatch and the ink bleeds away. A fire takes a chest and all its contents, parchment, coins, and memories, in a single greedy burst. A dispute turns violent, and in the chaos, maps are torn and trampled, their value forgotten. When the Lord's men come searching for evidence of tax evasion or land theft, the first thing to vanish is always the map. Burned, buried, or simply hidden, they become secrets, their loss an insurance policy against questions you never want to answer. Even in the best cases, a map's usefulness is fleeting. Roads shift as floods eat away the banks, bridges fall to rot, woods are cut back or spread in new directions. A village that was thriving when you mapped it might be nothing but ashes by next season, its people scattered, its fields abandoned. The landscape is as changeable as the people who try to live on it. Your work is always out of date, a record of a world that has already vanished. You learn not to become attached. Each map, once finished, is already lost. You keep a few of your favorites rolled in a leather pouch, tucked away in a corner of your hut, but even these are not safe. One winter, you wake to find them swollen with mold, their lines dissolving into black stains. Another time, you come home to discover that a rat, clever and desperate, has shredded your best map to line its filthy nest. Sometimes you wonder if the world is telling you something, that nothing lasts, that all your careful work will be erased, that memory and rumor are the only maps that truly endure. And yet, you cannot stop. Each commission, however doomed, is another attempt to pin down reality, to leave a mark, however faint, on a world that erases all but its own scars. There is a bitter humor in watching your maps live out their short, inglorious lives. You see them used as kindling, as makeshift hats for children, as notes for debts that will never be paid. You hear your lines twisted in the mouths of villagers. The forest is here, no, there. Wasn't it you who drew it? You shrug. You have learned to laugh quietly at the folly of permanence. On rare occasions, you glimpse something better. A merchant, carefully rolling a map and tucking it into oilskin. A scribe in a distant town, tracing your lines onto fresh parchment, his face lit with concentration. A young apprentice, learning to read your strange symbols by firelight. For a moment, you feel almost proud, almost hopeful, but you know better than to expect too much. In the end, the fate of your maps is the same as your own, temporary, uncertain, almost always forgotten. Still, you keep drawing, keep recording, keep hoping that somewhere, somehow, a piece of your work will outlast the mud, the rats, and the ignorance. That one line, one curve, one borrowed name will survive long enough to be read by someone who cares. And if not, well, at least you tried. In a world where nothing endures, that perhaps is the most anyone can do. If you believe that a cartographer's life is lonely, you have not spent enough time in the company of clients. The truth is, you are rarely left alone. Your services are needed. At least, they are wanted as long as someone else is paying. And each time a new client appears, you are reminded that your greatest challenge is not the mud, the cold, or the wolves, but people, impatient, demanding, suspicious, and always convinced they know better than you. Clients come in every possible form, from ragged peasants to merchants fat with other people's money, from petty lords to church officials with their heads full of scripture and suspicion. Sometimes they arrive with respect and gold in hand. More often, they come with complaints, confusion, and the expectation that you will perform miracles with a scrap of torn parchment and half a story. A typical client, let us call him the village elder, greets you with a list of grievances and requests. His land, he insists, has always been larger than his neighbors. The map must reflect this. If the stream now flows a different way, that is not his fault, and the map should show the old course. The woods, too, have grown or shrunk, depending on which side of the argument he finds himself today. He watches as you work, standing so close you can feel his breath. His gaze is heavy as a sack of flour. Every mark you make is questioned, every measurement doubted. You learn to listen more than you speak, to nod and murmur agreement, while quietly doing the work as accurately as you can without inviting open hostility. You become a master of the diplomatic line. Of course, sir, I will note the stone as you recall, but you see, the last map. Certainly, madam, the orchard may have been there once, but perhaps we could consult someone who remembers. Every word is a negotiation, every pause an opportunity for misunderstanding. When a merchant seeks your services, the transaction is more hurried, but no less fraught. He wants a map to reach a distant market, to avoid tolls, to outwit rivals or bandits. He wants shortcuts that do not exist, guarantees you cannot provide. If he gets lost or robbed, it will be your fault, never his. He will argue over every coin and then expect you to redraw the whole route when he changes his mind. You bite your tongue and pocket what payment you can, knowing you will never see the end of his complaints. The worst clients are those with power. A local lord may summon you to his manor, his voice heavy with the boredom of a man unused to being questioned. He expects instant results, flawless accuracy, and complete discretion. If your map matches his ambitions, he is satisfied until the moment another noble claims the river as his own, or the king's men come riding through. Then your map becomes an accusation, and you a convenient scapegoat. You have learned to keep no fewer than 3 drafts, one for the Lord, one for his rival, and one for yourself, hidden, unfinished, always ready to be destroyed. The church, too, brings its own brand of client. The priest asks you to chart the parish lands, to mark the boundaries of the cemetery, to trace the path of a holy procession. His requirements are as much about symbolism as about fact. The cross must be prominent, the old pagan stones erased or reimagined, the sacred well placed conveniently close to the church door. Any deviation is met with a frown, a prayer, and sometimes a thinly veiled threat. You smile, you comply, you revise, you repent, all for the price of a crust of bread and, if you are lucky, a blessing that might keep the worst suspicions at bay. Clients are rarely satisfied. If the map is too vague, they accuse you of laziness. If it is too detailed, they wonder why you have been snooping around their fields and gardens. Where is my granary? It stood right there last year. Why have you put the mill so far from the stream? Are you saying my father was a liar? This road is too crooked. My cart never turns that much. Why is my neighbor's house larger than mine? You are expected to record not just the world as it is, but the world as it should be, as each client remembers, or wishes, or lies about. Payment is another battlefield. Few clients pay in full, and most look for any excuse to reduce your fee. The bread is smaller than promised, the coins dull and clipped, the cheese suspiciously moldy. Sometimes you are offered goods you do not want, a torn cloak, a pair of ill-fitting shoes, a handful of turnips already going soft. Refusing is dangerous. Accepting is demoralizing. You make do, trading one misery for another, and hope the next client is marginally better. Once in a while, a commission goes well. A widow, grateful for your help in settling a land dispute, presses a silver penny into your hand and invites you to supper. A merchant, pleased with a clever shortcut, returns from market with a small sack of flour or a bottle of vinegar. These moments are rare, but you remember them, storing them away as proof that not every client is an enemy. Most, though, are simply people, frustrated, worried, hoping that a better map will solve problems no map can solve. There is a final, unspoken rule to dealing with clients. Always keep a copy, not for your own pride, not for posterity, but for survival. When the accusations come, as they always do, you need proof of what you actually drew, of what was agreed upon, of where the line truly fell. Sometimes your copy is the only defense against blame, against violence, against being run out of the village at midnight with nothing but your boots and your regrets. You endure your clients as you endure everything else, with patience, cunning, and a well developed sense of self preservation. You know that your maps will be contested, your honesty doubted, your motives questioned. It is not fair, but it is the way of the world. In time, you learn to expect disappointment and to measure your success not by the praise you receive, but by the quiet days when no one comes knocking at your door with complaints, demands, or threats. In the end, you serve because you must. The maps keep you fed, the clients keep you wary, and the work, despite everything, keeps you going. You survive by drawing lines, not just on paper, but between yourself and the world, hoping that, for one more day, those lines will hold. The more you know, the more you fear. This, perhaps, is the secret lesson of your trade. You began as an optimist, yes, even you, believing that to measure and draw was to bring order, to light up the unknown with ink and patience. But every new fact you gather, every secret you overhear, adds weight to your shoulders. Knowledge is a double edged sword. It can buy you food or protection, but it can just as easily get you hanged. Your mind is a cluttered attic of details. You know which fields have been quietly extended beyond the Lord's writ, which paths skirt the edges of forbidden woods, which wells run dry when the weather turns bad. You know who meets in the dark, which barns are never quite empty even after a poor harvest, which children are not quite the sons of their supposed fathers. Your work has forced you to notice these things, to listen and remember even when you would rather not. Some knowledge is harmless, the natural sediment of village life, but other knowledge is dangerous. Information about land disputes, secret love affairs, hidden debts, small acts of rebellion. You keep these things in your head, never on paper, because paper can be found, stolen, used as evidence. Memory, at least, dies with you. And yet, you cannot unknow what you know. It sits behind your eyes, coloring every conversation. When a neighbor greets you too warmly, you remember his whispered argument with the reeve. When the blacksmith's wife offers you a heel of bread, you remember who visits her shed when the village sleeps. It is a lonely, exhausting gift, this burden of hidden knowledge. Sometimes you long for the innocence of the field laborer whose world is bounded by the next furrow. Worse than the knowledge itself is the knowledge that others know you know. There are looks, too long and too sharp, when you pass in the lane. Questions, phrased as jokes, about what you've seen and where you've been. Sometimes the threat is explicit. Keep quiet, mapmaker. Some roads are best left unmarked. You nod, smile, and agree, knowing that the future is a landscape of pitfalls and unseen dangers. You hear stories, some true, some invented, of cartographers and scribes who vanished overnight, of records burned, of inquisitors summoned for less than a careless word. In an age when ignorance is a defense, your skill at seeing and remembering is a liability. You develop habits of caution, never repeating what you hear, never drawing more than you must, never lingering too long in places where secrets are currency. Your fear for the future is not merely personal. You see change coming, slow, inevitable, grinding like the millstones on the riverbank. Lords die or are replaced by harder men. New taxes are levied, new borders drawn, old lands are broken up, forests cleared, roads widened. Where once there was only rumor, now there is official notice. Your maps become tools of power, proof in disputes, weapons in the hands of those who understand their true value. You are asked for copies, for signatures, for seals. You feel the world closing in, becoming less wild, more measured, and infinitely more dangerous. Sometimes you dream of escape to a monastery where knowledge is cherished, to a distant city where the streets are broad and no one cares what you remember. You imagine a future where maps are for learning, not for judgment, where knowledge is safety, not a sentence. But then you wake to the same gray light, the same suspicion, the same web of obligations and threats. You become superstitious. You tie charms to your satchel, mutter prayers before setting out, leave offerings at crossroads when no one is looking. You do not know if any of it works, but it cannot hurt. The future is too uncertain, the present too fragile, for you to risk offending whatever forces govern fate. Sometimes, when you finish a map, you hesitate before adding the last detail, worried that the act itself might tip some unseen balance. Your relationship to the world is always conditional, always shifting. You are both insider and outsider, trusted and feared, valued and expendable. You learn to navigate this uncertainty as you navigate the muddy roads and tangled woods, with caution, with humility, with eyes open for sudden danger. Still, you persist. There is a stubbornness in you, a refusal to turn away from the work. Knowledge, for all its risk, is also a kind of light, a faint torch against the encroaching dark. You tell yourself that if nothing else, your memory of the land, its roads, its secrets, its possibilities, will outlast the next storm, the next war, the next hungry winter. It is not much, but it is yours. So you keep your secrets, both written and unwritten, and you guard them with care. You step lightly, speak little, watch much. You know that fear is the price of seeing clearly. The world, after all, is never kind to those who know too much. Winter is not simply a season, it is an ordeal, an annual reminder that survival is a matter of endurance, not fortune. The cold is a living thing, creeping into your bones, settling in your chest, gnawing at your hands and feet until even the smallest task becomes a battle. The world shrinks to the span of your own breath, white and fleeting in the frigid air. For a cartographer, winter is the enemy that makes every hardship heavier, every failure more final. The first snows fall early, sometimes before the harvest is finished, covering the mud and the dung with a thin, treacherous blanket of white. Roads vanish overnight, landmarks dissolve into ghostly shapes, and the familiar becomes strange and menacing. The villages close in on themselves, doors are barred, windows shuttered, and every trip outdoors is weighed against the risk of frostbite, or worse. You wake each morning to a hut colder inside than out, your breath rising in thin clouds. The straw mattress is frozen, and the blankets stiff with rime. You sleep in your clothes, wrapped in every rag you own, and still you shiver. Your fingers refuse to move until you hold them to the guttering flame of your single candle. Even then, the warmth is fleeting. The ink in your well has thickened into sludge. The quills splinter at the slightest pressure, and the parchment cracks when you try to unroll it. Drawing a map becomes an act of violence against your own numb body, against the unforgiving world, against the very materials that once promised order. Food is scarce, and what there is becomes quickly inedible. Bread goes hard in a day, cheese grows blue and sour, apples shrivel to leathery husks. You scrape the mold from your stores and count every bite. The villagers do the same, bartering for turnips and beans, slaughtering their weakest animals, stretching thin soups with water and memories of better days. No one wastes a crumb, and hunger, always present, becomes the only common language. The lucky might find a strip of dried meat or a handful of nuts left from autumn. For you, there is only what you can hide from rats and neighbors alike. The work, such as it is, grinds to a near halt. There are no new roads to measure, no bridges to inspect, no travelers to trade stories with. Even if there were, the risks are too great. A wrong step in the snow, and you vanish into a drift. A careless crossing of a frozen stream, and you are lost to the ice. Those who travel in winter are desperate, and desperation is a bad companion. You do what you can by memory, piecing together maps from fragments and stories, redrawing old routes with hands that ache so badly you fear you will never write again. The nights are the longest of the year. Darkness falls before the day is done, and the silence is absolute, except for the creak of timbers and the whistle of wind through gaps in the wall. The cold drives you to bed early, but sleep is thin and restless, broken by hunger and the dull ache in your joints. You dream of summer warmth and wake only to find your water frozen in its cup. In these months, illness spreads like a shadow. Coughs echo through the village. Fevers burn away the weak, and those who are left learn to speak in whispers, as if loud voices might summon more misfortune. You keep to yourself, hoping to avoid the worst, but every shiver, every sharp pain becomes a fresh worry. There is no doctor, only the old wise woman with her poultices and prayers, her stock of last year's herbs all but gone. The priest is as sick as the rest, his blessings falling flat against the reality of freezing death. You ration your candles, your scraps of parchment, your hope. The light grows weaker each night, and you find yourself staring into the gloom, counting the days until the thaw. Sometimes you wonder if you will make it. Sometimes you are sure you will not. Yet, winter brings its own strange camaraderie. The villagers, who spent the rest of the year looking at you with suspicion, are now too tired to care who you are or what you do. Shared hardship forges a kind of peace. You exchange stories for soup, a scrap of a map for a crust of bread. You huddle together for warmth, listening to the wind and the slow cracking of the ice on the river. There are no secrets in the dark. Everyone is equal before hunger and the cold. You try to work to keep your mind from slipping into despair. Sometimes you copy old maps by candlelight, tracing lines that remind you of roads you may never walk again. Sometimes you simply sit and stare at the flame, willing yourself to last until the sun returns. In winter, survival is not a matter of strength or skill, but of endurance and stubbornness. When the first thaw comes, late, always late, it brings with it a new set of miseries: mud, flooding, sickness, the stench of things that died and did not freeze. But you endure as you always have. You survive another winter, older, thinner, quieter than before. And as you drag yourself from your cold bed to face the next season, you know that the world will not thank you for your perseverance. The maps you managed to make, the lines you managed to draw, may be lost to mold or fire before anyone ever looks at them. But you are still here, still fighting the cold, the hunger, and the oblivion that waits outside every door. This is winter for a cartographer, a time not of discovery, but of endurance, not of creation, but of waiting, not of hope, but of grim, silent defiance against the dark. Dreams arrive with the darkness, uninvited and inescapable, clinging to you like the frost that gathers on your windowsill each night. They are both a comfort and a curse, a reminder that your life, for all its mud and hunger, is not only survival, but longing. The world outside your hut is brutal, unyielding, and indifferent. The world inside your head, for a few hours each night, is larger, stranger, and sometimes kinder. You dream, as all cartographers must, of discovery. Sometimes you see yourself striding across lands no one else has measured, tracing rivers whose names have never been spoken, climbing mountains that rise blue and cold into the sky. In these dreams, you hold maps as large as tapestries, drawn on parchment smoother than any you have ever touched. Your hands do not shake, your quill glides. The land unfolds beneath you, orderly and clear, yielding up its secrets without danger or complaint. There are other dreams, too. You are summoned to the court of a great king or a distant monastery, your maps spread before wise men who nod in admiration. Your work is praised, copied, preserved in libraries with stone walls and stained glass. You eat meat every day. You sleep in a soft bed, and no one curses you in the street or accuses you of sorcery for knowing the width of a field. Sometimes, in the deepest nights, you allow yourself to imagine that you will be remembered, not as a scavenger of scraps and secrets, but as a builder of knowledge, a name on someone else's map. But the dreams always end. The fire dies, the wind rattles your door, and the cold seeps back into your bones. Morning strips away the illusions. You wake in your straw bed, tangled in blankets that do little against the chill, your feet numb, your lips dry. The world is waiting, unmoved by your aspirations, unchanged by your efforts. You push yourself upright, every muscle stiff, every hope dulled by the slow ache of another day. The gap between dreams and reality is a chasm you cross every morning. The world you walk is smaller, meaner, and infinitely more persistent than the world you imagine. Your greatest achievements, maps you risked life and sanity to make, are ignored, lost, or misused. Your work is borrowed, copied, blamed, and forgotten. You are no scholar in a warm cell, no honored guest at a noble's feast. You are a servant of necessity, scraping by on the margins, mistrusted by neighbors, and barely tolerated by those with power. The reality is this: your hands are raw, your back bent, your mind clouded with fatigue. Your maps are stained, patched, unfinished. The days run together, one commission after another, one meal after another, when you are lucky, one encounter with suspicion or scorn. Sometimes, in the quiet moments between chores, you catch yourself thinking of the dreams and feel ashamed, as if hope itself were a dangerous indulgence. You know too well how quickly the world punishes those who hope too loudly. You have watched others, young men, wide eyed apprentices, even clever old women, dare to want more, only to be ground down by the indifference of weather, poverty, and fear. You keep your dreams close and quiet, hiding them like a last coin under your mattress, taking them out only when you are sure no one is watching. And yet, dreams have their uses. They keep you moving. They soften the hunger and the cold. They let you imagine, if only for a little while, that you are something more than a tired pair of hands in a cold room. On some nights, when the fire burns just a little longer and the wind pauses in its howling, you let yourself believe in the possibility of change, a kinder patron, a safer road, a map that will last longer than a season. Occasionally, reality gives way, if only slightly. A merchant returns with news that your map saved him a day's travel. A priest compliments your careful script. A child traces your lines and asks questions with honest curiosity. These moments do not last. but they are real, and you treasure them as fiercely as any secret. You are not a hero. The world will not remember your name, nor will your map survive the next flood or fire. But each line you draw, each road you measure, each secret you learn, these are tiny rebellions against the darkness. They are proof that you lived, that you tried, that you imagined something better, and that, for all the filth and fear, all the suspicion and hunger, is enough to keep you moving from day to day. When you lie down at night, with the wind at the door and the stars hidden behind clouds, you close your eyes and map out the world in your mind, not as it is, but as it might be. You drift towards sleep, cradling your dreams like fragile treasures, knowing they are the only thing the world cannot steal. Death is never distant here. It is the only certainty in a world that gives and takes with equal disregard. For a cartographer, death is not an event so much as a slow unraveling, the end of a fraying thread. You always knew your work would outlast neither the cold nor the suspicion, neither hunger nor the sharpness of the next winter's wind. Still, you drew your lines and mapped your roads, convinced for a while that a careful life could make an orderly death. When the end comes, it does not announce itself. There is no warning, no fanfare, no gathering of friends or family by your side. If you are lucky, you feel it as a deep exhaustion, a sense that the world has grown too heavy, the days too short. More often, it comes as a fever that will not break, a cough that burrows deep, a wound that refuses to heal. The village does not mark your passing with bells or processions. You are not a priest, nor a lord, nor a merchant whose debts are worth collecting. Perhaps you grow ill in winter, when food is scarce and cold seeps into your bones. The ache in your limbs is worse each morning. You cough, and no one notices. You wake shivering and cannot remember a time you did not. At first, you try to work, out of habit, out of pride, out of the terror of stopping. Your maps grow more tentative, your handwriting smaller, your lines shaky. The tools that once felt like an extension of your hands now seem as heavy as stones. Your candle burns lower, the light failing even as you strain to see the paper. Neighbors do not come to your door except in direst need. Most keep their distance, more from indifference than malice. The few who might have spoken with you are gone, lost to hunger or plague, or simply moved on, leaving only rumors in their wake. The village shrinks further, tightening against winter and its ghosts. At night, you listen to the silence and try to remember a time when you feared the dark more than the loneliness. Perhaps, in your final days, you try to set your affairs in order. You roll your best maps, tucking them into corners safe from draft and damp, though you know in your heart that nothing here is truly safe. You count your coins, fewer than you hoped, fewer than you need. You look at your hands, knuckles swollen and blue, and wonder if anyone will remember how steady they once were. It is possible, though not likely, that you will have a visitor, the village priest, bearing a blessing and a question about boundaries. A widow with bread and a memory of a time you were kind. They find you weaker, thinner, your words fading into a kind of mapless silence. They leave quietly, grateful it is not their turn. On your last night, you lie wrapped in your rough blanket, tracing invisible lines across the ceiling with what little strength you have. Your mind slips between memory and imagination. You see the roads you walked, the bridges you crossed, the fields and rivers you measured. For a moment, the world expands, bright and alive, every landmark clear, every boundary known. You feel, just for a breath, the hope that your work mattered, that someone, someday, will find a scrap of your maps and see the world as you did. But morning brings the end. The fire has died, the room is colder than ever, and your breath no longer clouds in the air. When they find you, perhaps after a day, perhaps after a week, they do not weep. The villagers empty your hut, pocket your coins, toss your tattered clothes onto the fire. Your maps, if they are noticed at all, are divided according to need. A piece to patch a leaking roof, another to wrap cheese, a few to light the hearth on the next frozen dawn. If any survive, it is by accident, hidden away and forgotten, a curiosity for a future you will never see. No one marks your grave. Perhaps you are buried in the churchyard, perhaps behind your hut, or perhaps not at all, the ground too hard, the hunger too urgent, the living too busy surviving. Your name fades from the villager's lips, your stories slip into the past, your secrets scatter like leaves in the wind. The roads you mapped become overgrown, the bridges you measured fall into the river. The world shrugs and moves on, yet in some quiet, indifferent way, your passing is not entirely meaningless. For a brief time, your maps shaped the journeys of others, however imperfectly. For a brief time, your lines offered order to chaos, guidance to the lost, solace to the curious. Maybe a child, years from now, will find a scrap of parchment, the faint ghost of a river or a hill, and wonder who drew it and why. Maybe they will imagine a world wider than their own, a life spent searching for meaning in mud and ink. You will not be remembered, not really, but you will have existed. You measured, you mapped, you endured. You defied oblivion for as long as you could, with nothing but a quill and stubbornness. In the end, the world returns to its natural state, roads overgrown, names forgotten, maps lost to weather and time. But for a little while, because you lived, there was a record, however brief, of a world that tried, despite its filth and its fear, to understand itself. And that, for a medieval cartographer, is as close to immortality as anyone can hope.